All right, so I guess we will get started. And so before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to say that the Field Museum resides on the ancestral homelands of the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi. The area was also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for more than a dozen Native tribes. It is my pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Cait Williamson, from the Natural Resources Foundation of Wisconsin. Cait earned her master's in environmental conservation from University of Wisconsin-Madison's Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies and has a bachelor's in biology and environmental studies from Lawrence University. Cait is not only our Armor seminar speaker today, but she is the Women in Science sponsored seminar speaker and one of our panelists at the Women in Science Mixer tonight, which is at 5:30 in the East Atrium and has free drinks and food. So open to all students especially. And so you can come and hear more from Cait at our panel discussion as well. So I hope to see you at that too. Cait is the director of the Natural Resources Foundation's Conservation and Environmental Education Programs and Initiatives. She's been there for over a decade at this point and focuses on a variety of projects related to addressing conservation issues using evidence-based approaches, including determining priorities for the driftless region, which is super cool for reptiles in particular. Very cool. I was excited when I was reading about that, as well as partnering with the Chippewa Community and Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission on wild rice recovery efforts at Spur Lake, and working on a program that addresses grassland climate change at the Rush Creek State Natural Area. Cait is also a leader with respect to diversity and inclusion, initiating the NRF's Diversity and Conservation Internship Program in 2021, which helps to support and diversify the conservation field using a network of hundreds of partners across Wisconsin to provide internship opportunities for undergraduates from historically excluded communities who haven't traditionally been in the conservation realm. And so with that, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Cait Williamson. Take it away, Cait.
Hi, everyone. Can folks hear me okay? Adjust. Okay. Thank you so much for having me. When Sarah emailed me about this, I had a complete moment, to be frank, of imposter syndrome where I was like me, like surely she mixed me up with another Caitlin Williamson, but really getting to speak at the Field Museum is a huge honor. So thanks for having me. I just thought I would start with a little bit of my background. And from what I gather, some of these talks, oh gosh, and I do want to start my timer because I will talk your ear off. Yeah, from what I gather from some of the other talks is you hear from a lot of professors and researchers, and my path really kind of trajectory went a different way in a little bit and in the work that I get to do with my dream job. And so I'm excited to share that with you. And so in my role as the director of conservation, my favorite days, of course, are in the field. A lot of my work, of course, is behind a computer or convening and bringing people together. But whether it's helping the DNR in Wisconsin search for Eastern Massasauga rattlesnakes, I did find that one. I was so proud of myself. Or on one of our field trips looking for critters on the Niagara Escarpment up by Door County, or searching for ornate box turtles. Also proud of this because you can kind of see in the back corner behind my right shoulder a little black dot. That's a turtle dog that are trained to detect ornates. And I actually found the first turtles of the day before the dog. Or birding. Sometimes I get to go birding for work, which is really fun. And I'll talk a little bit about our bird conservation initiatives. And I love my job. I really get to bridge conservation science with action in Wisconsin and really inspiring people and really thinking about how communities can make a difference. And how did I get into this? It started with wolves. I had the opportunity, and I should say I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. And I had the opportunity, my grandparents took me to a bunch of national parks when I was growing up. And when I first went to Yellowstone in the late 90s, this was shortly after the reintroduction of wolves. And I was just completely geeking out about it. And I was like, all right, I want to be a wolf biologist because that's what I had heard about and loved. small school, so you can kind of do independent studies and things like that. And so I actually made a wolf term for myself, which like is not a thing, but I made it a thing, I suppose, because I knew I wanted to prioritize that. So I did spatial ecology of wolves, and I did compared state and tribal wolf management. And then I had this opportunity to work for the Wisconsin DNR, or intern with the Wisconsin DNR. It was unpaid back in the day. I'm glad they don't do that anymore. To do all kinds of wolf monitoring work in a summer. It was a very fun summer. It was kind of a fever dream because I mentioned I wasn't paid. So I also worked at a coffee shop to kind of make ends meet. So I basically didn't sleep all summer. I was out doing howl surveys until 3 a.m. and then I'd have to be at the coffee shop at 7 a.m. You get the picture. It was a lot of fun. It was really intense field conditions. And obviously I loved it. I got to see wolves in person and just have tremendous experiences. But something I really learned from that is that as much as I love that and being in the field and spending time with wolves, I also love people. And a lot of field biology work, at least that I experienced, had been a lot of time alone in the middle of the woods, right? And so that really, between that and wanting to think about collaboration with folks, but also thinking about that bigger picture of, of conservation, right? People are the problem and people are the solution. And so that actually led me to my next kind of field experience, which was in graduate school at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I had the opportunity to work on human-elephant conflict work in Gabon and Central Africa. And that was just another phenomenal experience. This was in partnership with the Smithsonian's Conservation Biology Institute, and we were looking at spatial and temporal trends in elephant crop rating. We think about wolves and the conflict they cause, depredation or killing of livestock or pets sometimes. Let me tell you, if an elephant decides they're hungry, right, their plantation, they can just completely demolish it in a short amount of time. So huge conflict there. And that really just affirmed my interest in connections between humans and nature. And also that I really like to think big picture and problem solve and kind of be creative about solutions. And that's how I ended up at NRF, which serendipitously, I had worked there part-time during graduate school. And they offered to bring me on full-time after grad school, which was really amazing. And I've been there ever since. And I didn't start out in my dream job. I had a part-time kind of administrative role there, but really have been able to build my dream career. So is anyone familiar with NRF besides Sarah, who I know did extensive Googling? Okay, cool. So I can share a little bit more about our organization. We are a statewide nonprofit, and we were founded back in the 1980s when there were really big budget cuts to the State Department of Natural Resources. And at the time, folks said, we really need some sort of private foundation to bring in private funding for our public lands and natural resources. So that's how we got our start. Today, we still really carry out that kind of part of our mission of providing funding for public lands, but we do a lot more. So we really work to protect our lands, waters, and wildlife, and we do that by providing funding, leading partnerships, and connecting all people with nature. So I'll talk more about that. If you're interested, our website, which we did trademark, is WisConservation. People are always impressed with that name. So I'm excited to get to share a little bit more with you all about our work. So essentially, we very much focus on the places in Wisconsin that are biodiverse and ecologically important and imperiled, right? That are in need of support and care. And I'm really proud of this, but in tandem to this, we now, and this is very much codified in our mission and vision and institutional work, making sure that everyone has access, safe, equitable access to the outdoors, and really making sure to center inclusion in our work. And I think I titled this like a heart-led approach, and that's very much how I feel about our work is how can we take this science and understanding and inspire people to make a difference? Because as we all know, our planet, right, needs more help than ever. And we need everyone to be caring and acting and making a difference. And so we work in a few different areas that I'll be highlighting. And just to give you a picture too of kind of specifically what Again, I showed some pictures in the beginning of me in the field, which is really fun, but a lot of my work, again, is kind of behind the scenes, supporting a lot of the on-the-ground field biologists. So our work does encompass grant making. We have a partner network of thousands of partners across the state, especially the Department of Natural Resources and other agencies, as well as land trusts and nonprofits, even schools, nature centers, many, community-based groups. We do conservation planning and strategy support. I'll certainly mention our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Increasingly, a lot of convening and collaboration is so important in bringing, partners together and communities together to make plans on how to make a difference, as well as education and outreach. So I'll just get started with our lands and waters portfolio, a few examples here, and then I'll dive into a couple more specific examples of that work. So again, we really focus on the places that are most biodiverse in the state of Wisconsin, especially on public lands and especially state natural areas. I'm not sure if Illinois has a comparable program. Does that sound familiar? State natural area? No? Okay. So in Wisconsin, our program really was it was actually the first kind of nature preserve program in the country. And I know it's celebrating its 75th anniversary next year. And those are what we call the best of the best. So it's places that were never plowed or tilled or logged. These are places like old growth forests, pristine wetlands, remnant prairies. And naturally, that's where much of our species diversity is found, right? In these intact natural communities, state natural areas. And, a lot of them aren't large. Sometimes like the footprint of the Field Museum, some of the larger ones are 3,000, maybe up to 5,000 acres. But there are about 700 of these sites across the state. And they harbor 70% of Wisconsin's rare wildlife species, and 90% of our rare plant species are found on these SNAs. So super important. And not to get into politics, but they get like no funding from the state. So the part of the DNR that supports these and cares for these is grant funded. They don't get general revenue dollars. And we are the only nonprofit that is working on providing additional funding. So it's just critically important work for, like, again, what is the best of the best. Some examples of this, of how we supported public lands and other landscape work. We have a Cherish Wisconsin Outdoors Fund, which is a public-private partnership with us and the Department of Natural Resources. So when folks go to buy their hunting or fishing license, they're asked to make a voluntary contribution to Cherish, which we hold. And then those funds go to support public lands management. That fund is now at about $3 million. So that's a really cool way to secure funding for public lands. I will mention a couple of our climate resiliency and adaptation projects that we're working on. We're also just increasingly doing more conservation planning, which can definitely sound boring, right? I'm sure many of you have been through different plans, right? But how can we really bring people together and have this bigger vision of how to make a difference and inspire people to do that? I'll talk a little bit about at the end about our landscape kind of conservation vision for the future. And I did want to touch on prescribed fire, which I know is something that's really important in Illinois as well. Are folks familiar with fire as a land management tool? Yeah, nodding. Right, so it's incredibly important. Fire was on the landscape, pre-European colonization, and often intentionally set by indigenous communities. And of course, now it's very much been, since European settlement, suppressed. And even today, we are not able to burn as many acres as we need to really have healthy communities. So that's something we're really trying to ramp up, is how do we, support local burn associations? How do we, and a lot of this comes down to policy and also just public understanding. I was with my mother driving through southwestern Wisconsin, and she, we saw all these plumes because it was March, so burn season. And she's like, "What is that?" I was like, "Oh, it's prescribed fire." And she's like, "Oh my gosh, that's horrible." And I was like, "Oh no, Mom." So it's a big educational opportunity, right, to talk about burning, safe burning, and why that's valuable. So I will share now a couple of more in-depth examples, and we'll start up in the Northwoods. Has anyone been to the northern Wisconsin? Raise your hand. Yeah, okay. Really, really beautiful area. Much of the northern third of the state is heavily forested, and so uh, conifer forests, hardwood forests, and lake country. I always joke, well, it's not a joke, it's a fact. We have more lakes than Minnesota, just saying, in Wisconsin. So this is where we are. And in this image, you see a couple of folks from the DNR who are seeding manoomin or wild rice. And this is a state natural area that's owned by the DNR. And what I really love about this particular project is the partnership with the Mole Lake Band and several other Ojibwe tribes. And this is my friend and colleague, Tina Van Zyl. She's the environmental director of Mole Lake. She has been just a pivotal force in this project and collaborating with DNR to, not just support the ecological, care and stewardship of this place, right? Because we know wild rice is so important for wildlife species and the whole ecological community, but what's the cultural significance? And why is that so important? And for the Ojibwe, this is a huge part of their way of life, right? And food source. And actually they're part of their origin story of when they came from northeastern US to the upper Great Lakes was to find the place where the food grows on water. And that's manoomin or wild rice. So it's a huge part of their identity and culture, and it's been disappearing. So wild rice is one of the species most heavily impacted by climate change. It's also very sensitive to specific things like water levels. And Tina collaborated with our partners at the DNR, and we got looped into this amazing project to bring back wild rice to Spur Lake. And it started with a climate adaptation workshop. So this is something facilitated through the Northern Institute for Applied Climate Science, NIACS. And we've worked with them on a handful of different climate adaptation projects, and really has been working to address some of these kind of root issues and direct issues on manoomin to bring it back. And so you can see in this image here from this drone footage, those squares. So on this particular lake, there's a lot of things going on. Of course, we're seeing, warmer air and water temperatures from climate change. There's also a lot of different water fluctuations. And so anyway, one of the big impacts was increasing vegetation that would compete with wild rice. And so a lot of the green that you see here. And so they were able to actually bring in a swamp devil. It's a huge piece of machinery that clears out that vegetation. And so those are the experimental plots where manoomin was reseeded. So it's been a lot of work, both to do the direct work on the lake, also with nearby landowners to put in culverts. But also we really took this as an opportunity to say, hey, this isn't just a state natural area restoration and management project. Let's really celebrate the cultural importance of this. And so we partnered with Mole Lake and the DNR to host a couple of different gatherings at Spur Lake to celebrate wild rice and the restoration effort happening there. So this is an image from one of our feasts and celebration events. And we also decided, hey, this is a really amazing story. I wish I had time to show this to you today. I know I don't. But it's a short film we had made about this project. So I really hope you all get a chance to look it up. It's like 10 minutes and really, really beautiful way to talk about the impact that this is having and the community that has come together to make a difference. Again, it's really, really well done. I cry. I've seen it like 50 times and I cry every time I see it. Moving on to our wildlife portfolio. How many of you are species people? Okay, yeah. So we are really the only group in the state of nonprofit group in the state of Wisconsin dedicated to supporting our rare species, like all of them, not just birds or herps or something. We care about all of them. And we have over 400 species of greatest conservation need. That means wildlife that are threatened or endangered or at risk, or we just don't have enough information. So we do a lot of different work on this front. I'll talk about our bird protection fund in a little bit. SOS Save Our Songbirds is one of the projects we fund through that effort, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. We even have a bat fund, which supports our Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources bat conservation efforts. And we've done a lot with pollinators. I understand the Field Museum has been really up on pollinator front, which is amazing. And that's been a lot of fun. So we helped stand up our statewide monarch collaborative effort, and actually worked with donors to establish a pollinator fund, which has supported tons of different projects all over the state, from habitat work, in schools and backyards and community centers, all the way to actually the most heavily visited rest areas in Wisconsin have installed pollinator habitat. So if you're ever driving up north, or I don't know, to Minnesota from here, the 90-94 interchange, anyway, check out that prairie restoration work, all the way to really large projects on public lands. So we're definitely up to a lot of work with species. And I did want to throw this in. It's something I'm really proud of, and I know Sarah and others will appreciate. So among our species work, we had historically done a lot with birds and bats. And when I came on board, there was really nothing with herps, herptiles, amphibians and reptiles. And, right, there's a lot of, are any of you birders? I mean, I'm a birder. Yeah, so there's a lot of birders out there, right? And birders who donate to bird conservation work. And I was like, we don't have anything like this for herps. So we kind of crowdsourced setting up this amphibian and reptile fund from individuals, from businesses, from different organizations who wanted to have like a sustainable source of funding for amphibian and reptile conservation. So we set that up, and the very first project that we funded was on mud puppies. I love them so much. And what that really did was, DNR did not have a really solid understanding of their distribution in the state. And so this kind of set up this citizen science effort for folks, including a lot of ice fisher folks, to report mud puppy observations. With some folks who study amphibians and reptiles, and that had hundreds of people join. And so I think that, there's really an appetite for people to learn and find out ways to give back. And that's something that we do really well. And I should say, they're available on the website. I have some other ones too. There's like one about having like a mud mask, and if you want to print them out for next year. Next, I'm going to bring you to Rush Creek State Natural Area. So this is on the eastern side of Wisconsin, for those of you in the room, down here, right on the Mississippi River in Crawford County. So I took this picture from a boat on Mississippi. You see those kind of bald looking areas. Those are dry bluff prairies or goat prairies, if you've ever heard that term, because they're so steep. What's funny about that is there actually is an escaped goat who's like, her name's Molly. She's been running wild here for a long time. So giving that a whole new meaning. And this is a really, really special site. I believe that the Nature Conservancy first purchased it on their earliest in Wisconsin. And it's really considered a crown jewel among ecologists in Wisconsin. So if you do get a chance to visit, it's pretty like rugged, like there aren't trails or anything, but it's just an incredible place. And it's one of the largest remnant bluff prairies in the Midwest. Has some really intact species communities, and is really important right on the Mississippi River as that migratory flyway for birds, has a lot of remnant dependent invertebrates. So it's an incredible place. And we were able to partner with the DNR to turn this into the first grassland climate adaptation demonstration site, which I know it's a mouthful, but really the first site where property managers, the DNR were able to, take a step back and figure out what are the expected climate change impacts here based on what we know, and how can we make changes to make this site resilient. Large grants, including through the Wildlife Conservation Society's Climate Adaptation Fund, and working with individuals to make this happen. Again, it's a really big site, and we were able to implement about 1,000, actually over 1,000 acres of work. And so that ranged from everything from timber stand improvement. So you see the trees that are girdled here. You see those chainsaw marks on the base of the tree to remove these walnuts, and other trees to open up that oak savanna. And of course, fire. It was huge. And this is just really a remarkable site. So we were not only burning the existing remnant prairie, but installing on some of the previously cropped land around the area, installing new habitat. And that was all created with a kind of first of its kind climate informed planting list. So it was this very robust spreadsheet that was like one of those ones where you like keep scrolling and scrolling. There's so many columns of all these plant traits that land managers could consider, right? Because you really don't want to put all your eggs in one basket with climate. We don't exactly know what's happening. And so this was a place to really test that. That was one of the big learning outcomes. So how does management here under this very intentional climate resilient management scheme compared to kind of typical land management? And again, here's a view from the top. It's so epic if you do ever get a chance to go there. There's like bald eagles flying right here, and it's just an incredible site. So obviously a lot of monarchs and other pollinators and invertebrates benefit, a lot of different species. And this is another example where we didn't want to just fund and support and kind of partner on land stewardship. We wanted to take this opportunity to inspire people. And so we organized a series of these field days to invite other land managers and natural resource practitioners to learn more about this project, again, because it was the first of its kind in the state. So we invited folks from elsewhere in the Department of Natural Resources and Fish and Wildlife Service, from land trusts. There's even some natural resources board members. So that's kind of our DNR's leadership, governor appointed positions, and members of the Ho-Chunk Nation to visit and learn more about this and figure out what they can do to kind of take this model to their own lands that they're caring for. We also got some really great media coverage, including on public radio and in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, in the DNR's Natural Resources magazine. And we also made a film. You can tell I like films, right? We all know like video is just such a compelling way to tell that story to people. I also don't have time to show you this. It's another about 5-minute film that's really well done. We worked with a up-and-coming filmmaker named Ben Albert on this one. So I highly recommend you watch this. These are both available on our YouTube and free to watch. So that's one really amazing project that has been a huge honor for me to get to work on. And we're really working on bringing this kind of framework for climate adaptation to other places in Wisconsin, including Lulu Lake. If any of you have heard of that, it's in southeastern Wisconsin in the Southern Kettle Moraine region. And right now on the South Bluff of Devil's Lake State Park. Has anyone been to Devil's Lake before? Yeah. So that is a really, really special place. I'll have to come back and give an update in a few years. So the whole southern flank of that lake is become what we call mesified. So all the oaks have been crowded out by maples and other trees, and it hasn't seen fire in decades. And it's so big that DNR hasn't touched it because it's just like such a huge, huge thing. And right on the back side of that is the Ho-Chunk's Mawakon-Chunk reservation. So that was actually going on a tangent here, as it's not part of my talk. That was the former Badger Army ammunition plant. So really, really interesting how that's been reclaimed by Ho-Chunk, and an opportunity to kind of do this amazing climate resiliency work that benefits natural communities and species, but also people. So anyway, our third area of work is in education. So again, we really value, right, people's connections to nature. I mean, how many of you growing up or at some point in your life had someone who kind of helped give you that experience of spending time outside and, whatever that was? We just think that's critical to conservation, right? And so our vision is that everyone should be able to connect, explore, and engage with our natural world. And I always say just every kid outside every day. That's the dream. And that's not happening. And that's increasingly not happening, right? As younger kids just, it's screens, that's the norm. And so we want to really provide opportunities that facilitate that. And especially thinking about people in communities that historically just have not had safe access to do so. A couple of the groups that I wanted to highlight, one is called Color in the Outdoors. So this was founded by my dear friend, Christopher Kilgore, who's in the picture here. And Christopher founded this group to, really because he spent a lot of time growing up and throughout his whole life outside. And he has, he always shares like, I was the only one who looked like me in those spaces. And he really wants to change that. And so he arranges, and he has a full-time job. This is all on the side, right? So definitely a life's passion. Facilitates all these opportunities for folks to engage with nature in different ways. If any of you have heard of Black Forager on TikTok, I understand. Yeah, so we just had a partnership event with her, doing a foraging workshop for folks on his property, and she does everything from learning to basket weave, or I don't know, like learn to hunt. There's all kinds of things that he provides an entree in a very safe, intentional space for people to spend time in nature. So definitely check out his work at Color in the Outdoors. And we're also supporting the BIPOC Birding Club. I don't know if I feel like maybe they've come to the Field Museum. No? Okay. So this is an amazing group started in Wisconsin. Dexter Patterson here is one of the co-founders of this group, which really is intentional about providing safe spaces for people to go birding and celebrate nature together. So they're up to really amazing work. And if they haven't been here, I'm sure they would love to. So just to touch on our grant making, again, this was our kind of original purpose as an organization, was to provide funding to support conservation work. And that's something we still continue to do and grow. We're now granting out about $1 million each year to on-the-ground conservation and environmental education efforts. And that's made possible largely through individuals, as well as some foundations and businesses. We have a whole bunch of different grant programs. So we have a bird one, and I'll talk about our birdathon in a moment. We have a Go Outside Fund, and that's what it sounds like, about getting kids outside and hands-on with nature. We have a Trails Fund, and then we do have a Wisconsin Conservation Endowment. So that's actually like a community foundation for conservation in the state. So we have about 130 funds that different individuals have set up to support various conservation purposes, whether it's Devil's Lake State Park. Well, I mentioned the Amphibian and Reptile Fund. We have a Lower Wisconsin State Riverway Fund. We have just dozens of these funds. So that is a very important role that we play. Again, we also do a lot of work to inspire people and get people to give back in different ways. And the Great Wisconsin Birdathon is a really fun way that we do that. So it is a fundraiser, that's how it started, but it's become so much more than that. It's an event that we run in the spring, and how it works is you pick any day between April and June to go out and do your birdathon, and you get together your friends or family or coworkers or classrooms, whatnot, and you go find as many bird species as you can. And it's super fun. There are groups that do the full 24 hours, and they're super hardcore. I've run into some of them on like hour 23 of their birdathon, and they're like walking zombies. And then we have like classrooms who do it for an hour. My group for years was the Millennial Falcons, and we had like a lot of breweries that we stopped at along the way. So it's really fun. It's for everyone. And birds, right, are such a great gateway to connecting with nature. And then those funds raised support all these amazing conservation projects, from habitat work in Wisconsin, breeding grounds, to what we call stopover habitat, all the way to overwintering habitat in Central and South America. There's specific species that we always fund, especially our federally listed species like the whooping crane, piping plover, which I know you all have here in Chicago too, and Kirtland's warbler, which is state listed. And then increasingly trying to not just support kind of traditional bird conservation, but also how are we connecting future generations and all people to birds. And so we've been partnering with the BIPOC Birding Club, which I just mentioned, but also with, just for example, a few tribes we're piloting bird conservation efforts with this year, including the Oneida Nation has this amazing restoration project. It's like, it blows my mind. They've just done such a great job of transforming what was corn and soybean fields to this amazing wetland and prairie mosaic. And now they have like upland sandpiper there. It's like the epitome of like, you build it, they will come. So anyway, really great work happening through our birdathon. And just a fun way that we get people engaged and interested, get them in the door, is Fat Bird Week. So I'm sure many of you have heard of Fat Bear Week. Someone on our team was like, we need to have Fat Bird Week, right? Because fat birds are healthy birds. They're birds that have fueled up, for migration, and it's a way to have fun, of course. This, by the way, is the spherical white-throated sparrow, which was crowned the winner this year. And people love this. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but just lots and lots of people hearing about this, a lot of fun media hits. And again, it's a way to talk about like, why is it that fat birds are healthy birds, and what can you do to make a difference? Whether that's planting, native plants and habitat in your own backyards, doing things, and I know this is huge in Chicago, but like addressing window collisions, or even buying bird-friendly coffee, right? Like it's things you can do. So the chonk will return next year, so stay tuned. We also have an award-winning field trip program. Has anyone heard of, well, I guess you haven't heard of us, so you haven't heard of our field trip program, but I actually always joke, this is like trying to get Taylor Swift tickets, which I know firsthand because I did get tickets to see her. These trips are kind of like a best kept secret in Wisconsin. They fill up right away when registration opens. We have like over 250 of these trips all over the state, led by different conservation experts who want to share their expertise and passion and knowledge with folks. And so these are for adults and for families. These are just a handful of trips that I pulled from our guidebook. So this is just a hugely popular way for folks to learn. We have so many people who, love nature or maybe spend time hiking or recreating outside. And this is a way to learn about those places. And they really run the gamut, like name a topic related to the environment and we have a trip on it. So really fun opportunity. And yeah, I highly encourage all of you, if you're interested, to check it out. It's a great way to just visit some places too that are usually, or sometimes are closed access, or again, going with like the top experts in these places. We also have a Wayfarers program, which is for young adults or young professionals, really with that vision of wanting to connect younger generations to our natural world. So all kinds of fun events that we do there. This image is from our annual Glow Float. So we do this whole flotilla in Madison and then light up with glow gear. Right now, the Ice Age Trail, which runs through much of Wisconsin, has the Mammoth Challenge, where you have to hike like 40 miles in the month of October. So we do a lot of events around that. And wanting to connect back to, our vision for diversity and conservation, I can't really understate this, whatever, how important this is to our work in the future of conservation. That's something we take very seriously, and something that we're doing both internally within our organization, but also our programs, and supporting our partners in doing this work too. So some of the ways we've been doing this, one is we launched a community of practice that's all about diversity, equity, and inclusion in conservation. So we have over 100 different organizations who are a part of this. We meet bi-monthly on Zoom, and sometimes we'll bring in speakers. So we've heard from tribal historic preservation officers or Hmong community groups, or next time I think we have the executive director of the Wisconsin Council for the Blind and Visually Impaired talking about birding by ear and different ways to make programs more accessible. And that's just incredibly important for us as a conservation community to to continue to do better. And I think certainly a lot of strides have been made since I feel like I was in undergrad and graduate school and earlier in my career, but there's so much work to do. So that's a really awesome space that we've created. We also launched the Diversity and Conservation Internship Program, which is a joy of mine to get to work on every summer. It's only 10 weeks, which is wild because it's, it takes like a full year of planning, but also it's just like, how is that only 10 weeks? It really flies by. And I stay in touch with all of these students, not only throughout the year, but years after their participation in this. So we set this up really to acknowledge that in Wisconsin, the conservation field has been very historically white dominated, and wanting to make sure that folks know that conservation is a career opportunity. We were just talking earlier, when I was growing up, like I heard, right, wolf biologist, which is amazing. And as you heard, I love that, but that's not the only thing, right? There's so many ways to do conservation, or even if you're not in the conservation field, carrying that ethic with you, and no matter what career you go into. So we set up this program, and it works by pairing students with different host organizations. So they do their work with some of these groups. This is a snapshot of some of our groups in recent years for work Monday through Thursdays with that group. And then on Friday, NRF convenes the group, and we do a retreat up north and different field trips. They get to see conservation in action, really build that peer cohort. And we do a lot of professional development too. So it's very holistic. We do everything from, how to networking always scares them so much. They're like, just that word, they're like, what is that? I don't want to have to do that. And I'm like, it's really fun to get to explain to them, right? Networking is just connecting with someone, having a conversation, sharing what you're passionate about. We work with them to make their first LinkedIns, all kinds of things. And the mentorship piece is very, very key. So all of them have my personal cell phone, and they do reach out to me at all hours, and I welcome that. And that's something I've found really important, to make sure they know they're supported, not just during the, again, short 10 weeks of this program, but for the rest of their journeys into careers in conservation. So here's just some of our recent cohorts. This is the group that just graduated from our program earlier this summer. And some of my favorite quotes from recent participants, just how this, again, a short, really intentional program has changed a lot of their lives. So it's been a complete honor and privilege for me to get to spend time with them and just showcase how many different careers in the environment there can be, right? Whether it's field biology or research, or the type of work that you all do in the Field Museum, or if it's doing communications work that I do. I don't even like really have a great elevator speech, because I do like all kinds of things, and it's a lot of fun, right? It's getting to be creative, being a fundraiser for conservation, because we need financial resources to support this work. There's so many options, and I love getting to share that with young people, because we need everyone, right? All hands on deck. So just to wrap us up, kind of what does the future look like for the work that I'm working on and NRF is working on? Increasingly, we're looking towards what we call landscape scale conservation, right? So not just focusing on these state natural areas as individual protected areas, but from a larger landscape view, even beyond watersheds. So we have a couple places that we are really piloting this work. One is in southeastern Wisconsin in the Southern Kettle Moraine region, which I know is part of the Chicago Wilderness footprint, as well as the driftless area. So I'd mentioned that Devil's Lake work. So those are both areas where we're testing out this work. What does it look like to really have a vision on the landscape scale for natural communities that are in really good shape, that are resilient to changing climate conditions, where every kid in those communities gets to spend time outside and can do so safely, at home, but also when they're in school. Every community, building has feather friendly, like the bird anti-collision deterrents installed, native plants everywhere. Let's take a step back, because we can so get into the minutiae details of our work in conservation, but let's take a step back and remember that vision that we have for the future. So really just thinking about that holistically and really authentically engaging communities throughout that process is some of the things that we're working towards. So I did fly through and I didn't exceed my 45-minute mark. So thank you.
Time for a couple questions if anybody wants to ask Cait anything about what she talked about or anything else she's got.
Mhm.
Might have a microphone on.
Yes.
So I talk about it.
Yeah, talk louder.
How is the DNR doing in Wisconsin? You mentioned that the foundation was created as a sort of fundraising support during some earlier financial crises. How has it been over the last 30 years or so? Foundation of the foundation.
Yeah, there have been, so, I think our support is more important than ever. So we've had programs in Wisconsin, like the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Fund, which is nationwide a model for conservation, provides funds to groups to buy land to protect it. And that has been under threat and there's a chance that's not going to be renewed under the current legislature. So that would be a huge loss that would impact DNR. And also a lot of the traditional revenue sources for conservation are declining. And I know that's been in the media recently, but a lot of if you're familiar with the Pittman-Robertson funds, that comes from federal excise tax on firearms. That's traditionally how much wildlife management work has been funded. And there have been significant declines to that, in part because we're not having as many people go hunting. So that's a facet. Not to mention, the DNR is really restricted just in their capacity to bring on people. There's in statute limitations on how many full-time staff they can have, which is a huge barrier. So my take would be not great. I would love to see more support for conservation, right, at a policy level. And I think that really speaks to why groups like us and many others across the state are more important now than ever. And why it's important that individuals do work too, right? I know I'm between you and lunch, so I won't be offended if there are more questions. Yeah, go ahead.
I was really interested in the different projects that you all are doing, collecting data that then informs management, especially under climate change, and in particular with fire. Not only how we understand a new kind of horizon communities, ecological communities, but also recuperate and restore knowledge that has been part of the Native American ecological system. And I was wondering how you see that working across different types of land categories, so from native reservations, with sovereign management by tribes, to state land, and then if you have ever engaged or if there's any engaging with federal, state, and national forests in Wisconsin, how do you see those different governance systems in each other, or putting you all in a position where you have to pick one path versus another?
In terms of the climate adaptation work or fire specifically, or?
I guess I'm thinking expansively about that. Part of the actions that I'm working in South America. These different levels of governance, how we try to find common ground. Fire is particularly interesting because I think here in Chicago, it's even more complicated to talk about burning for native rewilded areas right outside of our museum. Burning, but that is a totally complicated conversation. And so I wonder if fire maybe has a way into that. Decisions that
I love that idea. So there is a Wisconsin Prescribed Fire Council that I'm not a part of, but I know that they're a very robust collaboration with folks from agencies. I don't know if there are tribal partners on that. I would assume so. But I think you're right that fire is a really kind of neat and important entree into building shared governance, and especially thinking about these places where there are multiple landowners and It just the former Badgerlands example again, which is adjacent to Devil's Lake State Park, that has ownership by the tribe, by Ho-Chunk, as well as the USDA Dairy Forage Research Center, it's Wisconsin, right? And the Department of Natural Resources, so like multiple stakeholders just within that unit. And that's actually a really interesting example of where, because of its land history of developing ammunition for World War II, had been chemicals used there. And so they actually did a burn on an area where they were not supposed to burn. And it was like a complete example of like, well, you lost institutional knowledge and like folks would have known that's where you don't burn. And there were like green plumes, really not good. And so DNR now has a complete ban on burning there just because of that, which was understandable, but now it's like, oh, that was the one area, everywhere else is fine and Ho-Chunk is able to burn. I don't think dairy forages. So anyway, it's an interesting way to kind of frame that and have those kind of shared governance conversations, which can be super challenging, especially when you're talking, government to government and everything. Any other questions? Yes, Eva.
So you are talking about like you want to help influence policy. Are you guys active with the Wisconsin government going and representing NRF?
Yeah, so what's interesting is we're actually a non-advocacy organization. We're one of the only Wisconsin groups that does not work on policy specifically. We have a couple of examples where it's very specifically tied to land management or wildlife. So the Recovering America's Wildlife Act and the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Fund are examples where we are doing more kind of education of our members and partners on that. But usually we try to kind of maintain that non-advocacy approach. And part of why that's beneficial is we have members and donors to NRF across the political spectrum who do see us as kind of a neutral party. Of course, there are a lot of times where I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish we could really get involved in this. And what's great is that there are other partners who do really focus on that work, and we really lean into our areas of strength and support, such as funding, in ways that other groups can't. So it's kind of filling those different niches, but we definitely stay abreast of what's going on and try to do a lot of education too for our partners.
One more question, and then I'll take Cait to her.
Thank you.
Go for it.
I like when you said that humans are part of the problem, not part of the solutions. How optimistic are you that, parts, diversity, species will survive the next 50 years?
I'm hopeful, like catch me on a different day. And sometimes I'm not. I think we have a lot of reason to hope. And so it's like conversations like these, the people I meet getting to do work who care, like we know what needs to happen and we know people can make a difference. We just really need to do that at scale and inspire everyone to be part of this movement. And I think that's obviously difficult, challenging work, but I think we can do it. What do you think? I hope so. Yeah. And I did have some slides here I removed, but I actually had pulled some of like my favorite messages from folks who've inspired me. And one of them is the late Jane Goodall, right? Who's a huge, advocate for maintaining hope and that we have so many reasons to hope. So, and we need to do that good work and be bold and work together on it. Okay. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, everyone.